Welcome to the Best Little Town Podcast, your go-to source for everything happening in the town of Bedford's local government. Whether it's new initiatives or important decisions shaping our town's future, you'll hear it right here. This podcast is dedicated to keeping our residents informed and engaged.
Hello, this is Bart Warner, Town Manager of the beautiful town of Bedford. It is Wednesday, April 23rd, and you are listening to the Best Little Town Podcast, brought to you in a cooperative arrangement between the town of Bedford and our partners with Media Squatch Communications. This is, if you're joining us for the first time, our effort from the town perspective to provide as much information as possible about the official activities of the town. Those are typically handled in our meetings, which take place the second and fourth Tuesday of every month at 7 p.m. in the municipal building located at 215 East Main Street. If you're able to come in person, we always love to have folks with us in the audience. But if not, we also live stream these meetings and we keep recordings on YouTube. And we also post on our social media outlets, which are also maintained through our partnership with Media Squatch. Last night, we had a couple of significant issues we covered, beginning with a work session prior to the town council meeting at 7. At 5:30 p.m., town council met to discuss several pieces of property that the town owns that are vacant. And so we were asking for council's input on their opinions of what should be done with those, what plans might be appropriate, also some of the history of the acquisition. Significant in that discussion was some property that the town owns up near Stony Creek Reservoir. For many years, the city of Bedford was in the water and sewer business, and our primary source of water was a reservoir created by impounding Stony Creek up on the mountains near the Blue Ridge Parkway. We impounded the water, then we sent it down to the Turkey Mountain Water Treatment Plant to treat it, and that was our primary operation for many years. Along with our reversion to town status, we merged our water system in with what was then the Bedford County Public Service Authority. And at that time, we created the Bedford Regional Water Authority, which since then has provided water and sewer service to those of us who partake of that. As part of that, we transferred most of our facilities and properties to the water authority. However, the property that we owned in conjunction with this reservoir operation was comprised of several parcels, not all of which were conveyed to the water authority. And so we discussed the history of that. In fact, the town owns 4 rather large parcels in the vicinity, including one that covers a great deal of the surface area of the water itself that is utilized by the water authority. So we recounted that history with the members of council, talked about how that came to be about 10 years ago, determined that it's probably in everyone's interest to approach the water authority about their interest in these parcels, particularly the one that covers the surface area of the reservoir. So one of the directions that council provided staff last night was to engage with the Bedford Regional Water Authority in a discussion of these particular parcels, with the idea that if they are interested, we can then start to talk about getting that property into their hands, because again, we know at least this one parcel is probably integral to their operation. And so we want to make sure we do something that makes sense in the long term. And we will be pursuing those discussions. And if anything comes of those, there will be public action taken by council, and it'll be published on the agenda. There's no definite time frame for that. I just want to make people aware that that's a discussion that's being held. And that discussion was held in open session purposefully because a few years ago there was discussion by a prior council about this issue, and there were some procedural things that maybe got out of alignment and some confusion that we then had to revisit. But the plan this time is to directly talk to the water authority, because these parcels impact the water supply that they produce, and we feel like it's the correct and neighborly thing to do to negotiate with them first and directly. I will say if we don't come to some arrangement or agreement with them, we'll come up with an alternative plan that will also be a public process. So anything that is done with town properties, our town attorney staff has advised us there is a process. And basically to dispose of any town-owned property, there has to be a public hearing, there has to be an ordinance, and there has to be a 3/4 vote. And given the fact that we have 7 council members and the way the arithmetic works, I think that means that actually 6 people out of 7 would have to vote for something. So, for those who might be concerned about the process there, it has to occur that way. It has to occur publicly. In cases of property ownership and management, occasionally we do get inquiries from people about town-owned properties on a random basis. Typically, those are in the forms of formal offers and contracts, but those cannot be executed outside of that process. So we talked about that with council last night, and we appreciate Jeremy Carroll, who was serving as the town attorney, for clarifying that. We also talked about several other parcels that are owned by the town, one of which is a large parcel adjacent to Liberty Lake Park, just to the north of Liberty Lake Park. It fronts on Burks Hill Road. We purchased that about 5 years ago, and the consensus was we need to think more about what would be the best use for that property. So staff has been directed to report to council on previous ideas and the discussion there, but no action is intended to proceed with that. We also talked a little bit about some of the other random properties that are smaller. And again, if we're going to sell properties, we have to go through that process, but it may be reasonable to engage a realtor and to procure those services. Again, that's got to be a public process as well. To see about some other smaller parcels, there's some kind of random bits we own around town as small as half an acre that might be worth marketing to the private sector for people who are interested in doing that. So we probably will be issuing an RFP to procure services of a realtor. That is, again, a procedural requirement. Does not necessarily mean anything specific is forthcoming. We also talked a little bit about the plans for the police department. We had gone pretty far along with the notion of constructing a new police department facility on the vacant lot at the corner of Plunkett and Court Streets, and had engaged Wiley Wilson to do quite a bit of design work. I will tell you, we got very far along in that process before we took a pause. Council had originally authorized up to $900,000 to be spent on a design, and we had spent upwards of $500,000 before we put the brakes on that project and kind of stepped back to reevaluate it based on several factors, including our debt ratios, our long-term plans, and our priorities. And so the other public directive to staff was to notify Wiley and Wilson that we're probably just going to halt that process altogether, talk to them about what that means in terms of the relationship. There was no formal vote taken, but just for purposes of information, the idea of constructing a police department at a cost of $10 million or upwards, most likely not going to happen, and we are formally withdrawing from that process. We do continue to evaluate the needs for space for the police department, and we've talked about other options there, including what we've already done in relocating some of our police staff to Liberty Lake Park in the former community building. That process is underway, but we also do continue to explore other alternatives. Interestingly enough, we did hear a little bit about that very issue, the police in the park, during the regular meeting from one of our citizens. So it's funny how things kind of tie together. That was the primary discussion that took place before the regular meeting. That was, again, a work session by town council. Those are held basically to provide all members of council with the same opportunity to get and share the same information with one another. We do record the minutes of those meetings. Those are available if anybody's interested. We typically do not live stream or broadcast those meetings because they're, well, literally working sessions. There's a lot of details. There's a lot of free thinking, a lot of talking out loud, and we kind of follow the direction of our neighbors up the street. The Bedford County Board of Supervisors often does the same thing. If there's a specific topic or area of discussion that really needs effort and work that's kind of down in the weeds and there is never any action taken at these work sessions, by the way. They're designed to get information out amongst council to create informed decisions later. So that's why we do what we do, and that's how we do it. We want to give council and staff as much opportunity to kind of brainstorm and think out loud without confusing people about outcomes. Again, these are discussions, they're planning sessions. No action is taken. No action can be taken. Based on what I told you last night, we've been given some direction and staff to pursue certain things, but if those come to fruition, they will appear on a council agenda and there will be a formal action taken. So that's kind of a good segue to remind folks that, if you have questions about what is taking place in the town and certainly the formal policies and positions, the best source of information and the most reliable source of information is the regular council meetings. And again, if you can't come directly on the second and fourth Tuesday, go to youtube.com and Google or type in the search Town of Bedford. We have all of our meetings, both recent and going back for a long time, archived, so you can see them directly, follow along. You can go to www.bedfordva.gov, click on government, and see the agendas and minutes for every public meeting, including our Planning Commission, Housing and Redevelopment Authority, and Town EDA. Or you can listen to this podcast, which is a recap each time we have a public meeting and providing a deeper dive into some of the information behind it. And with that said, at 7:00 p.m., we convened our regular council meeting. We begin every meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. Last night, that was led by Boy Scout Troop 183, who were in attendance. We had 5 young men present in our meeting, which we were glad to have them, and Mayor Stanley recognized them, and there were some comments later in the meeting, which we'll cover. But we opened the meeting led by those young folks who led us in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. The approval of the minutes, which I mentioned just a minute ago, then took place as part of the agenda. Then I gave my report. I just had a few items of information that I passed along last night, which I'll repeat right now. First is that the Town of Bedford has active franchise agreements with 3 different entities for provision of broadband internet service. Those 3 franchise holders are Shentel, Zytel, and Comcast. Shentel has been active in the community for quite some time. In fact, they are a successor company to previous franchise holders. And for a long time, they were the only official franchise holder within the town limits. As we went through that process in years before, people had asked if it was possible to get any other providers in town. And the answer was always the same. Those franchises are non-exclusive. They're pretty much market-driven. And heretofore, there have not been a lot of companies who have expressed an interest in serving the market. However, just within the last couple of years, both Zytel and Comcast have obtained these licenses, and they are currently in the process of extending their services within town. So as that occurs, citizens and businesses are encouraged to check out the offerings of all the franchise holders in consideration of their individual needs, and we think it is significant and a very positive sign for the community that we now have 3 different companies that will be up and running very soon to provide services and options for our businesses and our citizens. We also have quite a bit of development going on in town in general. Specifically, there are some expansions at Walmart and Bedford Memorial Hospital that have recently been permitted. Walmart is expanding their pickup area for those that use the call ahead ordering service at Walmart. When you pull up to the side and they bring your groceries to you, apparently that's been very successful for them, and they're physically expanding that. Bedford Memorial Hospital is also undergoing a significant upgrade of their infrastructure, particularly their electric service. Our building official reports that the value of the work they're performing is $8 million. That also includes some upgrades to their transformers and their backup infrastructure, some of which are funded by a grant through the Federal Emergency Management Agency that was obtained through the town of Bedford. So we're excited to know that we have a healthcare facility of that caliber within our town limits and that close to our citizens, and also to know that they are making the investments in the infrastructure to continue that service for the foreseeable future. In addition, Gary McIver, our building official, reported that there are currently 18 random individual lots that are under construction around town. So in just about any quadrant of the town you visit now, you might encounter some construction vehicles, maybe a little bit of mud, maybe a little bit of delay as you move out and about, but we are seeing some definite signs and obvious activity in terms of construction in town that we wanted to make people aware of. We expect that's a trend that's going to continue for the foreseeable future. Also gave an update on a bridge at the end of McGee Street that spans the railroad and connects to Orange Street. That bridge was deemed to be unsafe back in 2019 and has been closed since then. To address that issue, we've been working with the Virginia Department of Transportation to find a way to address that issue and replace that bridge with a better alternative. And we have been working through the State of Good Repair grant program, which basically is something made available by VDOT, in which they cover the entire cost of replacing the bridge, and the town does not have to contribute anything. Now, I mentioned that bridge has been closed since 2019. Obviously, it doesn't happen as fast as we'd like, but the backstory there is there's no cost to the town, so we kind of weigh those costs against those benefits. At this point, we are currently waiting on Norfolk Southern to complete their portion of the plan review process before construction activity moves forward. The next item of the regular council meeting agenda was appearances before council. Last night, we were joined by Reverend Caleb Walker, who lives in town on Peakland Court and serves at Franklin Heights Baptist Church in Rocky Mount. He said a prayer invoking blessings on the council and the activities of the town. Next, Patricia Hunziker, who's a resident of Whitfield Drive, spoke about questions that she had and also that she had heard about related to our electric rates and charges. Ms. Hunziker noted that she was a former employee. She worked for the town for over 30 years and knew her personally as a colleague. And she recognized that electric rates tend to increase frequently and sometimes all at one time. She asked some questions about operations, which, frankly, she wanted some clarification of her own understanding about how we project the impact of those increases and then how we pay the bills related to our electric and general fund and solid waste operations. Ann Cantrell, our finance director, answered Patricia's questions directly. There's a lot of technical inside information related to those responses that I'm not going to attempt to cover in this podcast, but I would encourage you to revisit the video recording. And we appreciate Patricia raising those and to further clarify issues. Of course, if you ever have any questions about town activities or policies, we're happy to receive those. And council members also commented on that in their comments later. We had one other person who signed up to speak to council during the appearances section. That was Danny Kirby, who's a resident of Watson Place. Mr. Kirby shared his concerns about the appearance of Liberty Lake Park, specifically the presence of porta-johns there, and that is in reaction to some issues we've been having with our permanent structures and facilities there. One of which is the fact, as I mentioned just a minute ago, that we are relocating part of our police department into what was formerly the community building. That has resulted in the need to secure that building and limit public access, and that's resulted in a reduction of a public restroom and also an external water fountain facility. Mr. Kirby expressed his concerns and frankly, disagreement with that change. Also suggested that there should have been an alternative plan considered. With regard to the water fountain situation and the restroom, he suggested that the current setup creates a burden and an inconvenience to families who are utilizing the parks. And he also encouraged all of the council members to tour every park facility and closed his comments by stating his view that we need to establish some priorities and we need to make sure we meet those priorities. Moving on to council comments, Councilman Jay Ippolito began by thanking everyone who was personally present in the council chamber. He also recognized the Bedford Regional Water Authority and the recent announcement of some upgrades to the wastewater treatment plant that they've made and the services that they provide. Councilman Ippolito also recognized Bedford County Solid Waste for conducting a trash pickup event within town limits. Councilman Todd Foreman also thanked all who were personally in attendance at the meeting. Councilman Stacey Haley echoed that comment, and I can tell you all 7 council members do really appreciate the input and the comments they receive, and particularly the folks that make an effort to come to the meetings. Councilman Haley welcomed the Boy Scouts who were present, and he also noted that last night was Councilman Dwight Evans' birthday and wished Councilman Evans a very happy occasion on that regard. Vice Mayor Darrell Updike spoke to the Boy Scouts in attendance, noted his experiences in his youth as a member of 2 different Boy Scout troops in the community, and expressed his appreciation for the values of the organization and the services they provide. Councilman Dwight Evans also thanked everyone for coming out to the meeting, also talked about how much he very much appreciates people voicing their concerns and opinions. Councilman Dave Foster, again, thanked everyone for coming. Mayor Stanley thanked everyone for coming and made a point to note that the feedback is very important, either positive or negative. And he advised that, council is tasked with making decisions which sometimes may not be popular and may not satisfy everyone, but it's important to have the dialogue and the continued open lines of communication. CG went on to provide some more special recognition of the Boy Scouts who were present and talked some more about his personal experiences with the organization. And then we moved on to the rest of the agenda, which consisted of the consent agenda, which was appointment of a member to the Central Virginia Alcohol Safety Action Program Policy Board. The name kind of covers what they do. It's pretty extensive, and that is typically the town is represented by the police chief. Shannon Walker, as our interim chief, has been serving the remainder of the 3-year term on that board, but now that Jim Moore is on board as our permanent chief, he was appointed by unanimous vote to a 3-year term to the Central Virginia Alcohol Safety Action Program Policy Board for a term that will expire August 31st, 2028. The next item of new business was a proclamation declaring that Bedford is a stroke-smart town and providing more information and educational background related to strokes, their impact on the community and on the public health, and also the importance of recognizing the signs of onsets of stroke and the importance of timing and getting treatment. The mayor read the proclamation. Again, I'm not going to repeat everything that's contained therein. If you're interested, we'd certainly encourage you to watch the video, but after he read the proclamation, he presented a copy to President Stacy Vaught and Chief Nursing Officer Carrie White of Bedford Memorial Hospital. The next item of business was a presentation of the fiscal year 25-26 budget proposal. That was covered by Ann Cantrell. And again, that's online in several venues where you can obtain that information. And view it personally. Ann kind of did a high-level presentation, also provide some background statistical information related to the reasons behind the proposal and some of the specific changes we're talking about. Wanted to note, just from my perspective, a couple of additional things. One significant change that is included in the budget proposal is the town is intending to withdraw from commercial solid waste service. We've received a few questions and concerns about this and wanted to be clear. This pertains only to businesses and commercial customers. We will be making no changes to our residential curbside collection. That will continue under the same rates, fees, and practices. But in evaluating our costs related to the commercial service, we're recommending a discontinuance of that as part of the next fiscal year. There are several reasons behind that, which I'll cover here, right now in this podcast. One is that the relative cost of that service currently outweighs current revenues. And on the collection side, we find that at any given time, our monthly expense per account is about $150, and we're only receiving an average fee of about $30. And that's just the collection side. The real cost of this service relates more to the disposal of that waste. And because we have a different arrangement for commercial trash service as opposed to residential trash service, that's what's drawing this major policy change. And also the difference between the two, I need to explain. Residential solid waste is collected and disposed of at the Bedford County landfill as part of our reversion agreement. The county does not and cannot charge the town for that service. So effectively, the only costs we have are collection. And we found that our fees are sufficient to recover that cost and also to give us a little bit of leeway to address things like capital needs and also future growth. What we found on the residential side is our monthly expense per account is about $19 or $20, and we currently charge $25. Now, again, we know we're getting a little bit ahead of that, but that relates in terms of our profits, but that also relates to long-term capital needs and our ability to provide future services. Getting back to the commercial solid waste, our annual costs within our budget for disposal are about $319,000. The biggest part of that is we have to find a way to get rid of that waste because we don't have a similar arrangement for it the way we do with residential. We operate a transfer station where we collect and deliver everything we collect to the transfer station. Then we have to haul it somewhere, and we are subject to tipping fees. Currently, we have an arrangement with Bay's Trash Removal where they come in and combine the solid waste that they privately collect with ours. They then haul that at no cost to us. Go wait for the train to go by. They haul that to Pittsylvania County. We do that because Pittsylvania County has the lowest tipping fees that are within a reasonable distance. They also do not charge us the cost of transporting that. So even with that arrangement, we're still finding that to be an expense that we have to bear related to the transfer station. Also, we're aware of the fact that there are several private providers operating within town currently who offer similar or improved levels of service at similar or reduced cost to what we currently charge. The other thing is if we continue to stay in the business, we know for a fact that we probably would have to go up on our fees based on the current ratio of cost to fees. Also, there's a strong likelihood that will be impacted by some increased capital costs in the coming year. Going back to the transfer station, there are several components of that, including a scale that we know needs to be repaired. The processing floor of the station itself needs to be replaced. There are also ongoing monitoring costs that are significant, as well as equipment that is tied to that operation. In addition to all those factors, we're effectively competing against private businesses within our borders, whereas the residential service we provide, the curbside service, is nearly exclusive. So, as the budget is proposed, it currently would include getting out of the commercial curbside service that I've described, but not the residential service. That would take effect with the adoption of the budget. Because that will have impact on our customers, we intend to provide an effective date for that to give folks chances to find alternatives. And we'll also be contacting the 190 or so account holders there to let them know and to provide them with some guidance and options. Now, again, that's subject to approval of the budget as proposed. The next step in the process is a public hearing on the budget, which will take place at the next regular meeting of council, which is Tuesday, May 13th, beginning at 7 o'clock p.m. So if you have concerns about that issue or any others contained with the budget, that is the best time to come speak to that. Another thing I'll mention strategically related to the budget proposal is, again, an outcome of reversion. The reversion agreement basically is a 15-year arrangement spanning from 2013 to 2028. One feature of that is, and what made it attractive for both the city and the county at the time, was there was some additional revenue from the state that would be provided based on some revenue calculations. Our share of that money is $750,000 a year, and we receive that on an annual basis from the county until 2028. We're trying to make sure that we have not become dependent on that for operations, because that money is going away in just a few years. So to get ahead of that figure, we have several components operationally and budget-wise that we're implementing to address that. Basically, right now, we have a 5-pronged approach to addressing this loss of revenue that's coming. The first is revenue from growth. We are actually starting to see that. We talked at our last meeting about the fact that we have seen 1.4% more revenue from real estate taxes in the current year than we had anticipated. We didn't do anything to our rates, and there hadn't been a reassessment. That's just reflected in the new growth that's taken place in the calendar year. So that's not quite enough to cover the whole $750,000, but we're encouraged by that metric, and we think that that's something that should benefit us as we move forward with the developments that have recently been approved. The second approach is we're expanding the application of our business privilege license program. Business license is something that we charge basically to any commercial interest within town. We maintain a roster. It basically is a permitting process where we recognize that they're in compliance with applicable town regulations and that they are a legitimate business within our town. That's a tax that frankly went away with the reversion. There was a holiday on that tax for approximately 10 years in our first experience as a town, but we found that it's been hard for us to see revenue growth in other aspects, so unfortunately we've had to bring that back. The current year budget is expanding that to businesses that have gross receipts of $250,000 or more. Currently, that figure is $1 million. I will note that the rates that we charge are lower than what our neighbors are charging. And this is a tax that pretty much all of the towns and cities around us are charging, and their typical average rate is about 20 cents per $100 of gross sales. Our average fees are 10 cents to 15 cents. So while we are expanding this and it is applying to more businesses within town, we are still lower than the adjacent localities who are charging it. The next focus area for addressing the $750,000 shortfall is some operational efficiency improvement, and that relates directly to the commercial solid waste discussion. Again, the biggest cost there is in terms of disposal. We can't get out of the disposal unless we get out of the collection business. We did talk about a month ago about contracting out the collection service. However, our town attorney reminded us that that still ties us to an obligation for disposal, so we would not realize the savings on the disposal side that we're looking for. And while the upside down nature of costs and revenues on collection is significant, the real expense is on the disposal side. And that's something that if we do away with collection in this fiscal year, we're going to talk about in the next fiscal year. And if we don't have a need to maintain a disposal facility, we'll see what we can do to make better use of that or offer it to other agencies that would actually find it useful and or valuable. The fourth part of our plan to address the $750,000 is the fact that we are constantly paying off debt, and frankly, by 2028, the town will be debt-free. And so currently we're averaging a yearly cost of about $200,000 in debt service. That will go away. That helps address this $750,000 shortfall. The fifth part, if all else fails, is to make use of fund balance. We'll talk about that in relationship to the next item of new business in a minute, but the town maintains a rainy day fund. It's defined as unrestricted net assets or fund balance, and that's basically the money that's left over once we pay all our bills and once we bring in all our revenues. The town has policies for all of its funds. The two major funds are the general fund, which are basically tax-supported activities that we typically don't see a return on, and then our electric fund, which is more of a business fund and is more supported by fees and charges. The town has a policy whereby we are required to maintain a minimum of 25% in each fund as our hedge against crises, unforeseen expenses, or, just the theoretical rainy day. Since our general fund budget typically runs about $10 or $11 million, that requirement is about $3.5 million, or is about $2.5 million to $3 million. Projecting into the budget as it's proposed, we do have a little bit over that. In the general fund, we're projecting that we will have about $3.3 million in fund balance over a requirement of, I want to say it's about 2.8 or $3 million. Biggest thing there is we did have $4 million in that fund. We have committed some of that in the current year to replacing some fire apparatus. So again, moving on to our plans for addressing the $750,000, we have $3 million in hand to make up any shortfalls. However, we're going to try very hard not to utilize fund balance for that purpose. And again, that's just some commentary. The budget has been presented. It has been posted online. Would certainly encourage everybody to check that out and check out that document. The last item of new business related to our electric services and some fees that we charge. Specifically, there is a power cost adjustment. This is a factor that is included in your electric bill that's designed to recover power costs which exceed those costs included in base rates. The electric business model for us, we've talked about it before, but just as a reminder, Bedford does not generate most of the power that our citizens need, and we have to obtain that from other sources. Now, that's a little tricky in that we have to purchase that in advance to make sure that we have access to it. We also have to make sure that we purchase enough of it to meet demands, but we don't want to buy too much because then that drives up costs. That's the purchase side of it. Sometimes there are complications such as other fees that we are charged. We talked a couple of months ago about a capacity charge that the operators of the grid are assessing us, and that relates to the fact that demand for electricity is far outpacing supply. Due to several factors, frankly, we're not creating enough power generation to keep up with what we're going to need in the future. And so all power companies are being charged for that. And in our case, we're going to be paying $5 million to PJM in capacity charges. After some efficiencies, that nets out to an increase of $2 million for us. We talked about that as part of the discussion a couple of months ago. I can tell you we are addressing that by the town eating half of that cost, $1 million. The rest of that will funnel through what we talked about last night, the PCA, that'll show up in November. The PCA is typically revisited every 6 months, takes effect May 1st and November 1st. It was put into effect about 10 or 12 years ago when we had an unexpected cost of $700,000 in 1 month. And that was due to increased demand during a winter storm. At that point, we had to scramble to recover that through our rates, and we had to adopt a rate increase, and it impacted all of our customers, including our operation. So the PCA was put into place. Think of it as a shock absorber to address things like this and manage them and spread out that cost in a longer term rather than an immediate hit. So we know there's a $2 million net charge coming our way. $1 million of that's going to be funneled through this PCA coming in November. Want to make sure everybody's aware of that. The adjustment that we were talking about last night related to transmission costs that we paid to Appalachian Power Company. Again, we do generate some of our power through solar, hydro plants, and our ownership of some facilities in other places, such as Ohio and Illinois. But in addition to the fact that we have to buy the electricity itself that is created and generated elsewhere, we have to also pay the companies that maintain the lines that provide that access. And so we have about a $500,000 cost coming to us from APCO for these transmission fees. If we were to pass along that entire cost to our customers, that would result in an increase of about $8 for the typical residential user of 1,000 kilowatt hours each month. What we talked about last night, again, council decided to absorb half of that cost. So there will still be an increase to customers. It's a percentage increase. The PCA is basically a multiplier. But council is going to absorb about $250,000 of that expense and pass the rest through the PCA, which means that, again, the impact on the typical residential customer, when we say that a user of 1,000 kilowatt hours, will result in a bill increase of $4.98 per month. And that's a figure of about 3.34%. In discussion of this item, council members expressed regret. Of course, all of us who are customers of the electric department will be paying this. But also the fact that this is largely out of our control. And again, the biggest factor driving increased electric costs, which electric costs are going up for everybody in the foreseeable future. We want to be completely upfront about that and honest, mainly because there's not generation that matches the demand. Some of that is due to regulatory policy. I'm not going to get into the politics because I'm not allowed to do that, but when we prevent efficient means of providing power, basically we have to pay for that, and that's what's happening. A lot of these decisions were made as late as 15 years ago. So, again, there are several good arguments on both sides in the manner in which power should be generated, but we're starting to see the fact that, particularly with data centers and large users, there's a greater demand for the power that does exist, which, based on simple economics, means it costs more, and that's what we're facing. And that is directly impacting us right now as a utility operator and also as utility customers. So after discussing that, there was a motion to approve the proposed PCA to go into effect, which would recover 50% of the cost that the town was facing, with 50% to be passed through to the customers. That motion was made by Vice Mayor Darrell Updike and was seconded by Council Member Dave Foster. I mentioned prior year reserves and fund balance. The electric department also has a similar rainy day fund. Given the size and operation of that, we currently have about, I want to say $10 million in that fund. I guess I need to double check my figures. Ms. Cantrell has those handy. The cost that the town is absorbing is coming off of that. So the town basically is dipping into its rainy day funds of about $283,000 to save the customers that cost, but we are passing along the others. The other thing about the rainy day fund in the electric department is That's a large number, but the capital costs for electric are also pretty significant. We've talked about ways we can generate more power, but those are all pretty expensive and have some upfront costs. Starting at about $1 million to add another turbine to our hydroelectric plant, to $1.4 to $2 million for diesel generation, which also, is debatable in terms of its impacts and quality. So we do maintain a rainy day fund there. We're required to have about $5 million in the bank. Currently, we have twice that. Lately, we've been using that to offset these costs for the customers. So we truly regret the fact that these costs are going up for everybody, but hope everybody understands that council is doing what they can and are borrowing from reserves to minimize the impact on customers. The motion to approve this manner of applying the PCA passed by a vote of 5-2 last night. Councilman Evans, Councilman Foreman, Councilman Foster, Mayor Stanley, and Vice Mayor Updike voted for the motion. Councilman Haley and Councilman Ippolito voted against it. And with that, the meeting was adjourned until May 13th at 5:30 p.m. for another work session. Coincidentally, that one will focus on the electric department operations and the terms and conditions related to operational regulations, permitting, fees, and also our internal policies and procedures as well. So again, that work session will not be live streamed, but it is an open meeting and there will certainly be minutes published related to it. And we would encourage you to come May 13th at 7 o'clock to receive information and observe the official proceedings of the town, and also to provide input on the fiscal year 25-26 budget proposal. Till then, if you have any other concerns, please feel free to contact us directly. The main number at Town Hall during business hours is 540-587-6001. You can email me directly at bwarner@bedfordva.gov. These are exciting and challenging times in our community. We're seeing several transitions happening and taking place. Change is upon us, and we all probably have different views of that. So it's very important that we stay in touch with one another and communicate our points of view, because ultimately we need to make sure that we manage expectations and have a clear vision and strategy moving forward. On that note, I thank you very much for your attention, your patience, and your support, and look forward to joining you again next time on the Best Little Town podcast.